Little music from Iron Maiden there for you from an album called Peace of Mind, their song The Trooper from 1983. This is Hexes and Soldiers episode 18, and I am still Jason. Thanks for coming back. I hope everybody's doing well. And yeah, this episode is now officially old enough to vote, smoke, and fight and die in a war. So, wow, where did the time go? This show has grown up quickly right before our very eyes. And regarding this episode, I'm going to do something a little different, nothing too major. As I have a lot of one thing and a little of another, I'm just going to go ahead and excise the little. And what I'm referring to is the news. There is basically nothing going on. And that's fine with me. Maybe we'll get bombarded here in a week or two with new and wonderful things. And the top 10, there will be no top 10 this week. And I hope that sits okay with everybody. I will make it up to you guys next episode. Now, the reason I'm doing this is time's sake, and based on what I'm doing regarding the meat of the matter, it is just chock full of stuff, and we'll be getting to that in a second. But that's why I'm going to do it this way. Um, I've been doing well. Thank you for asking. And just real quick, if I could, I'd like to say just thanks everybody for your support and regarding this show and all the subscribers. As last night, this show officially hit the century mark in subscribers, and that is to say, we now have 100 subscribers, and that's awesome. Again, thank you everybody for your support and your willingness to listen to yours truly. That means a lot. So let's just hop right in. And I will start with something by way of preface before I get in to the meat of the matter. And that is a book review. And from time to time I mention books. And as I was driving around the internet, I've came across this. Now I haven't read it, but I intend to. And it sounds pretty interesting. And well, it's called Achtung Schweinhund. And written by an English gentleman. And this is a book about men and war. Not real conflict, but war as it has filtered down to generations of boys and men through toys, comics, games, and movies. Harry Pearson belongs to the great battalion of men who grew up playing with toy soldiers, refighting World War II, and then stopped growing up, inspired by the photos of the gallant pilot uncles that decorated the wall above his father's model-making table, by toys such as Action Man, according to Pearson, not a doll, and board games such as Escape from Colditz. Dressed in Clark's commando shoes and with the air-fixed army in support, he battled in the fields and on the beaches, in his head and on the living room floor, and across his bedroom ceiling. And 30 years later, well, he's still doing it. This hilariously self-deprecating memoir is a celebration of those glory days, a boy's own story of the urge to play, to conquer, and to adopt very bad German accents, shouting Donner und Blitzen at every opportunity. This is a tale of obsession, glue, and plastic kits. It is the story of one boy's imaginary war and where it led him. And that is, if I didn't mention this, by an author named Harry Pearson. And just a few things off the top of my head. Escape from Colditz. Now, I never owned that game, and I don't even think I ever played it. But that sounds really familiar. I think I came across that on Board Game Geek at one point. So I am slightly familiar with that. And then playing on the living room floor, my lord, if I can think back, before the days, long before the days of the internet, households would get, well, entire encyclopedia sets. This would serve as our internet. And, pictures and information and just flip through them. But also, these weren't just solely for information. I had the Encyclopedia Britannica set growing up. Pretty big books and a ton of them. Well, these things worked perfect for setting up on the living room floor and creating forts and trenches and things for the little plastic army men that I played with on almost a daily basis. and lots of fond memories doing that. But yeah, the book sounds interesting, and like I say, I haven't read it, but I'm going to get around to doing that at some point. And if that sounds interesting to any of you, well, help the guy out and buy his book, and let me know what you think of it. Also, a few things, just real quick. Um, what have I been playing? Still been messing around with that Battles of Napoleon thing, and I've been tweaking it and messing with it and taking it apart and putting it back together. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because almost every game I play, I enjoy it, but it almost seems like it's research for the game that I hope to design someday. So if I get into a system and the rules jive a certain way and it just clicks with me, then I'm fascinated by it and I'm compelled to dive deeper into it and to kind of live vicariously in the designer's head to see what was going through his head and all that. So that's what I've been doing, and I don't know how much longer I'll be messing with that. Probably until the next thing shows up. And by way of that, I've got a few things on orders. Of course, Army Group Narwa, or Narva, I should say, from Sweden has yet to show up, and well, now I'm starting to think it's just lost in the mail somewhere. And the odd thing with losing things in the mail is sometimes they show up years later. I think I had a birthday card show up with a check in it over a year after it was sent. So I hope that's not the case. And well, it's better that it shows up than never, but I guess I'm just being impatient. It's only been a couple weeks, so we'll give it some more time. I also have pulled the trigger on a gamer's uh, game called Fallschirmjager. And I was aware of this for a long time, but I had always thought it was a part of their tactical series. And I have a few bones to pick about the Gamers Tactical series. I won't go into it now. But as it turns out, it's from the standard combat series, and well, I'm more than happy with that and can live with that. So I pulled the trigger on that. I also have some ASL stuff on order. Best of Friends, as well as Action Pack 8, Roads Through Rome. I kind of missed the boat on those, so I thought I'd scoop them up before they go out of print. And then I was at MMP's site yesterday, and I don't know how long this has been the case. To my knowledge, it has just happened, but Decision at Elst is now shipping and available for order for those of you that haven't pre-ordered it, like myself. So I went ahead and ordered that, and that should be a hoot to play. So yeah, no top 10 and no news either, which will bring us straight to the meat of the matter. And this will take up the majority of the show, so here we go. I call this the Eye of Italy, and you'll see why in a second. But specifically, we'll be talking about the Abbey of Monte Cassino, and I hope everybody's prepared. Big plate of spaghetti, and has some red wine to sip on, and you can just sit back and listen. So here we go. Here's the scene. It's March of 44, and north of Naples, 21 Allied divisions are intent on throwing Italy out of the war, but a line stands in the way. And this is better known as the Gustav Line. And this thing is fortified with 700,000 Germans. And at the center of everything is Monte Cassino, a 1,700-foot high ridge that stands like a gatekeeper to Rome. Now here resides a 6th century Benedictine monastery that peers like a great eye. And hearing it being described by the people that fought there, specifically the Allies, reminds me of the Eye of Sauron in The Lord of the Rings, and just could like see everything, and very intimidating and ominous. This eye covered the surrounding landscape, and to take the monastery would cost the Allies over 100,000 lives. So here's the background. Churchill wants an assault on what he refers to the soft underbelly of Europe. And the logic goes something like this. Italy can be removed from the war, and almost 2 million Axis soldiers be tied down and prevented from strengthening the Balkans and northwestern Europe when the Allies launch D-Day. And as the Allies move up Italy, they come roughly a third of the way when they hit a ridge-like landscape that is perfect for defending. And additionally, they run into the Gustav Line, a defensive area that guarantees to slow, if not completely stall, the Allied advance on Rome, is what we have here. And the best line of approach the Allies' mechanized army can use is an approach via highway, and this would be Highway 6 or Route 6, whichever you prefer, which cuts right through the heaviest of German defenses and is within direct view of the monastery. And on January 2nd of 44, General Clark's Second Corps becomes the first to take a crack at blowing past the German line. Now, the plan is for the U.S. 36th Division to cross the Rapido River near St. Angelo, and in so doing secure the left flank of Route 6, while the U.S. 34th Division approaches Highway 6 from the right, capturing both the town and monastery, and in so doing open up the highway. Now, the first obstacle is the Rapido River itself, which is heavily defended by dug-in Fallschirmjager. And I'll stop here because I'm going to go in a little depth with Fallschirmjager and then come back and finish. So regarding the Fallschirmjager, I'm sure some of you, if not most of you, are already familiar with this. It's just your German paratroops. And as far as paratroopers go, I think it was Russia that started the whole paratrooper thing. And then Germany took it and ran with it. Probably the first major, or any operation for that matter, of the Fallschirmjager would have been Holland. And of course, the game Fallschirmjager by the gamers that I have on order deals with that. And then probably the biggest airdrop was the drop at Crete, and somewhat of a disaster. A lot of these guys were dropped in the ocean by mistake. The bulk of these guys were dropped right over the British, who were just picking them off left and right as they fell through the sky. And this whole thing left a bad taste in Hitler's mouth, and he was never quite the same regarding the way he felt about the Fallschirmjager and their use. But on the other hand, Churchill was inspired and felt that the paratrooper had a major role to play in the days to come, and well, that would be the case, obviously, with things like Market Garden. But yeah, Hitler, this whole Crete thing left a bad taste in his mouth, and after that, he really pretty much just relegated their use to more or less ground infantry. But anyway, the Fallschirmjager have, and I came across this, I thought it was interesting, the Ten Commandments, and starts with this. Number 1, you are the chosen ones of the German army. You will seek combat and train yourselves to endure any manner of test. To you the battle shall be fulfillment. Commandment 2, cultivate true comradeship, for by the aid of your comrades you will conquer or die. 3, beware of talking. Be not corruptible. Men act while women chatter. Chatter may bring you to the grave. 4, be calm and prudent, strong and resolute. Valor and enthusiasm of an offensive spirit will cause you to prevail in the attack. 5, the most precious things in the presence of the foe is ammunition. He who shoots uselessly merely to comfort himself is a man of straw who merits not the title of parachutist. And 6, never surrender. To you death or victory must be a point of honor. Number 7, you can triumph only if your weapons are good. See to it that you submit yourself to this law, first my weapon and then myself. Number 8, you must grasp the full purpose of every enterprise, so that if your leader is killed, you can fulfill it. Number 9, against an open foe, fight with chivalry, but to a guerrilla, extend no quarter. And finally, number 10, to keep your eyes wide open. Tune yourself to the topmost pitch. Be nimble as a greyhound, as tough as leather, as hard as Krupp steel, and so you shall be the German warrior incarnate. Some pretty hefty stuff. And heard one guy talking, an old veteran Fallschirmjager, and he said that he joined because the girls in Germany at the time just went nuts over German parachutists. So that was his incentive to join. And then regarding the equipment of the Fallschirmjäger, which is, I thought, interesting, I'll start with the parachutes themselves. And it says, the worst parachutes used by a major power were those of the Germans, which were based on the Italian Salvatore design. And it says the German RZ, or rucksack packed open series of chutes, primarily the RZ-16 and 20, had a single strap between the back of the body harness and the chute. And this resulted in a face-down position, which required knee and elbow pads. And I don't know if any of you have seen this, but the knee and elbow pads in pictures of Fallschirmjagers, well, this would be why, because they basically land face first. And that is because of the type of strap and harnessing that their parachutes entail. And it says, yeah, knee and elbow pads, which require a forward roll, and I would imagine a ton more injuries than the way we do it nowadays. The employment of this type of parachute is curious since German aircrew used a chute that had lift webs attached to the shoulders like the British and American models. This landing position led to many landing injuries, as I suspected. To allow for proper deployment, the paratrooper had to leap forward in a straight body dive when jumping. Control during the descent was almost impossible except for a superbly trained and agile trooper, and even then little control was possible. The forward roll landing also kept the parachutist from carrying much equipment on his body. Except for pistols, grenades, and the occasional submachine gun, German paratroopers had to rely on containers for their main combat equipment, and this was a big problem in Crete, as they weren't able to land with a bunch of rifles and things, so most of that stuff was parachuted down a container, and then they had to meet up with it later, which didn't always work out. The chute was attached to the harness with 4 clips, which, like the American chute, were difficult to undo when under fire or when the trooper was being wind dragged. And this also was a problem in Crete because a lot of these guys landed in the olive trees, I guess they were, and had to cut themselves down. And a lot of these guys were shot before they could do that. One of the guys interviewed an old British veteran that was there, said it was like taking candy from a kid when it came to picking off these German paratroopers that were landing in Crete. And later on in the interview, he shows some remorse, and apparently this really messed him up, and he wasn't even able to go back to Crete to confront his demons of the past for 40 years. But anyway, the Germans issued each Fallschirmjäger with a gravity knife to cut the rigging in an emergency, and the opening shock of this canopy first parachute was also very harsh, but the chute would fully deploy and under 40 meters, which meant a lower drop altitude and less time dangling helpless in the air. And it says, finally, regarding parachutes, by the Crete invasion, the Germans deployed various colored parachute canopies for camouflage and to aid in the identification of commanders and or containers. Then, regarding the Fallschirmjäger's weapons, the Germans produced the widest range of special and modified items for their airborne troops. And the most famous item was probably the FG-42, which was a gas-operated semi-automatic rifle, and it was made strictly for the airborne. And only about 10,000 of these things were made. It was an advanced design that fired full automatic from an open bolt for cooling and semi-automatic for a closed bolt for accuracy. And the weapon had a small bipod and fed from a 20-round magazine on its left side. Weighed about 10 pounds, fully loaded, fired the full-size 7.92 millimeter, which was really too powerful for this kind of weapon, but that's what they used. And even with a bipod, it was difficult to control when fired on full automatic. Then the standard MP-38 and MP-40 submachine guns and bolt-action Mausers were used by most paratroopers. Some German paratroopers used a shortened and folding version of the standard Mauser, but this was not a success, and had both a strong recoil and a huge muzzle flash. Now, late in the war, many Fallschirmjäger were issued with the MP-44 assault weapon, as evidenced by photographs of the 3rd and 5th Fallschirmjäger Division in the Ardennes and the 1st and 4th Fallschirm Division in Italy. And the MP-44 fired a shortened and less powerful version of the 7.92 standard round. The weapon itself was made of stamped metal and fired either full or semi-automatic. The MP-44 was the forerunner of all modern assault rifles, and if you look at an AK-47 today, you can still see a striking resemblance between the two. And this weapon only went into mass production in '44, and supply never came close to equaling demand. And despite their high priority, most Fallschirmjäger ended with the war having standard bolt-action Mausers. And then the German paratroopers were equipped with what was undoubtedly the best light machine gun of World War II, the MG-34, and later on the MG-42. And the 42 replaced the 34 because it was easier and cheaper to make, and being made extensively from stamped steel parts. Weighed a little over 11.5 kilograms, fired a phenomenal 1,300 to 1,400 rounds per minute. And the barrel was quick and easy to change, and the weapon was very tolerant to dust and dirt. And when equipped with a tripod, it made a very useful medium machine gun, and each German infantry squad, which was roughly 10 to 12 men at full strength, was equipped with a MG-42, and this went a long way toward overcoming the relatively slow firing rate of the bolt-action Mausers. And the fast-firing MG-42 was a major factor in German defensive abilities throughout the war. It was also the prototype of all modern general-purpose machine guns, and in slightly modified form is still in service as a standard weapon with the German, Italian, and Yugoslavian armies. Moving along, the Germans were the first to employ recoilless artillery, using a 75mm version as early as Crete, and the 75mm gun was broken down into parts and parachute dropped. Later, a 105mm version weighing about 850 pounds was introduced, and German mountain and Jaeger troops also used recoilless artillery. And then two types of squeeze-bore anti-tank guns. You got your 28 and your 42mm used by the airborne, which gave a pretty strong punch for their caliber, but the shortage of tungsten, apparently, needed for the special shot put these guns out of service by early '43. And one of the more successful modifications of standard equipment was a shortened Kurse or K version of the 81mm mortar. And this saved considerable weight and range, was not severely penalized. And some engineer units used the Eintos Flammenwerfer, which was a single-shot flamethrower originally developed for the SS. So you also have weapons and equipment containers, and because of the rather athletic forward landing roll, as they call it, necessitated by their parachute harness, the German paratrooper could carry little more than a pistol and some grenades on his person. Therefore, many weapons containers called Waffenhalter had to be carried and dropped, and a single 40-man plus platoon of Fallschirmjäger needed no less than 14 containers just for weapons and a basic ammunition supply. And the containers were carried either under the wings or in a bomb bay. Each container could hold over 200 pounds of equipment, and the maximum loaded weight was about 260 pounds. It was about 5 long and about 6 inches square. The container had a crash pad at one end, and the parachute was connected to the other. Some containers were equipped with a pair of small wheels, in fact, and a tow bar that could be clipped onto the container after the drop. And this allowed the container to be towed from the drop zone. The number one priority of the troops upon landing was to find their containers, and as I stated, in Crete, this wasn't always successful. Colored bands or other markings were used to aid retrieval by the correct units and to indicate which items the container carried. And then you had a few vehicles, and the Germans never came up with a lightweight airdropped or transportable vehicle to equal the Allies' Jeep, and that's surprising as they came up with just about everything they could think of. But they did use motorcycles, and equipped with sidecars for reconnaissance. And the motorcycles were also equipped with a towing hook, so they could pull light anti-tank and artillery weapons. But towing strength for such a combination was low, and cross-country performance was poor. And the German Fallschirmjager also made limited use of Kettenrad, which was a semi-tracked vehicle based on a motorcycle, and you may have seen this in Saving Private Ryan, I think, towards the end. The Allies make use of this to rabbit ammunition back and forth. And the Kettenrad had a motorcycle wheel in front and a track on each side of the rear. In clothing and equipment, the Fallschirmjäger had a wide variety of special clothing, and as they were Luftwaffe personnel, the basic uniform was that of the flying units and in blue rather than the field gray of the Army. The flying blouse was basically a short-waisted, open-necked jacket with buttons hidden under a fly front, and the trousers were similar to the flying pattern, but had a pocket on the right thigh for the gravity knife, and this was a single-bladed knife carried to cut away parachute rigging in an emergency. To operate this knife, and I've seen a few of these at gun shows in the past, pretty neat looking, but the knife was held pointing downward, and a button push released the blade. Once the blade was extended, the button was released, and this locked the blade in place. The trousers also had an opening on the outside of each leg at knee level, and this was to allow knee pads to be donned or removed, and knee pads were necessary, as was stated earlier, because of the face-down landing position necessitated by the parachutes they were using, and elbow pads were sometimes worn, but these fitted over the jacket and the smock. And the Fallschirmjäger were originally issued with a high side-lacing boot. There was no advantage to this, but it was soon replaced by a front-lacing boot. And in the later part of the war, the troops wore normal German combat boots. And the paratroopers also used a variety of smocks. And the smock became as much a badge of the Fallschirmjäger as the rimless helmet for their jump. The smock was worn with the uniform and combat gear and under the parachute harness. And the purpose was to keep the parachute rigging from being caught up in the personal gear. The first smocks had short, tailored step-in legs, and removing the smock to put it under the gear was an aggravation in training and a dangerous delay in combat. Later, smocks had snaps at the lower edge, which could be used to make legs. And the early smocks were also plain gray or gray-green. And later smocks were camouflaged in various patterns, but plain smocks were still in evidence at the end of the war. And there was also a special Fallschirmjäger helmet, which is probably the most easily notifiable thing regarding specific Fallschirmjäger equipment. In appearance, it was like a normal German helmet with the rim cut off. And the first helmets were actually made in this fashion, but later helmets were produced to Fallschirmjäger specification. And the helmet harness was more extensive than that of the normal helmet, and the interior was padded. And a helmet cover was commonly worn, usually in the same pattern of camouflage as the smock. And I believe the Fallschirmjäger also had their own particular camouflage that I won't get into for time purposes, but the bandolier was made of cloth and worn around the neck. It hung down on both sides of the chest, had loops on the rear through which the waist belt passed. Had about 12 compartments, which could hold about 120 rounds. And as far as accessories go, for assault rations, the Fallschirmjäger was provided with a rather uninspired combination of processed meats and cheeses, ersatz instant coffee, and dry rusk-type biscuit crackers. And that might bring to mind the hardtack that I mentioned in the previous episode in the Civil War. I'm sure it wasn't much different. In combat, German pairs often received issues of rum or brandy, which was nice, and were also issued with dextrose thirst-quenching tablets. And Fallschirmjägers used the standard German Army Espit stove, which was a folding solid fuel cooker, a little larger than a packet of cigarettes. It opened up to one of two positions. The cooker could support anything from a pot to a cup, and when closed, the stove held the solid fuel supply. When necessary, benzidine-type drugs were issued to keep the troops alert for extended periods of time. Now, there's a long-going myth that states Hitler's troops in general, and maybe the SS specifically were doped or drugged or, I don't know, basically on speed. And that's why they fought so well, so bravely. But yeah, that's just a myth. But this is a particular instance in which there's a small kernel of truth can be found in that myth. And I wasn't aware of this, but yeah, apparently Benzedrine was used to keep them awake. If they had to stay awake for hours and hours and hours and hadn't slept, you got to do something, I guess. And this is what they did. There are two drawbacks to the chemical stimulants like this, and of course, one is you deplete all your energy reserves, and you tend to fall asleep as soon as it wears off. And even while actually engaged in combat, I guess some of these guys who had been using this, once it wore off, they just fell asleep. And these types of stimulants also gave the user a raging thirst, and water was notoriously short as far as supply and heat of battle, so you had to watch that. So back to where I was, it says the first obstacle was the Rapido River, which was heavily defended by Doug and Fallschirmjager, which we're now very familiar with. But before Strong's platoon could even reach the Rapido River, it was nearly annihilated, and with help he finally reached the river, only to find that most of the boats were riddled with holes. And this fact, combined with all the weight of their equipment, caused a lot of the guys to drown in this attempt. The U.S. 36th Infantry took 2,000 casualties and was now down to a third of its total strength. So now we're looking at February 14th of 44, and the Allied advance towards Rome has effectively stalled. You've got the 36th and the 34th Divisions skirting the town. One soldier describes the terrain as being similar to the moon. No trees, no leaves, no foliage at all, just craters. Desolate and eerie, he states. And overlooking the whole thing, towering over them, was the eye, the monastery. Another described the monastery as like a great big eye from which there was no escape. It was determined that the monastery could be defended easily with a ratio of 1 to 6. So for every 6 guys you threw at it, one guy could easily defend. Enter the 2nd New Zealand Division, and having exhausted themselves, the U.S. forces are finally relieved by the 4th Indian and 2nd New Zealand. It's then that they realize Cassino has to be brought down in order for them to move forward. There's no going around it. The situation is like this. The Abbey is encircled by a 200-meter neutrality zone. Its walls stand about 150 feet high. They're about 10 feet thick. The Germans state they have nobody anywhere in or near those premises, and thus the monastery should be preserved and spared any bombings. You know, this place is full of antique books. All of them, probably no copies made, so I mean, irreplaceable. And big argument to this day is, were there Germans there or not? Well, Germans say they weren't there, and of course they'd say that. But Americans and other guys state that the accuracy of the artillery was just to such a level that there's no getting around the fact that they had spotters up there. So the order is given to bomb the Abbey and then assault the reeling Germans as they attempt to regroup. So on February 15th of 44, the bombing takes place, and under the direct orders of General Alexander, 147 B-17s engage in the bombing. The whole area is turned into clouds of dust and rock, and one guy says it felt like an earthquake was taking place. So now the Abbey's turned into rubble, and where the Allies had intended to move right in, instead take their sweet time. And this is a costly mistake. Meanwhile, you got German paratroopers from the elite 1st Para Regiment just filling the nooks and crannies of the Abbey. And you have a similar situation in Stalingrad, where the Germans had bombed the crap out of the city and basically leveled it. But all that really did was create more effective and treacherous hiding places. And eventually British soldiers of the 7th Indian Brigade do move in. And as they move across a rocky ridge with no cover, German machine gun fire and mortar fire pretty much wipe them out. And this would be the end of the Allies' second attempt to capture the Abbey, and it also ends in failure. So now we're looking at March 11th, 1944. For 6 weeks now, the Allies have chiseled away at the Germans with no end in sight. So a third assault is prepared and will concentrate on the town of Cassino itself. And an air assault is to be launched on the town, to be followed by an immediate infantry attack. This sounds familiar, right? Additionally, several infantry units will make their way to Castle Hill, which will act as the springboard from which to launch another frontal attack on the monastery from what is called Hangman's Hill. So after the planes move in and perform a 4-hour bombing session and 250,000 artillery shells are lobbed at the Germans, the New Zealanders move in. But the town was so horribly bombed, not a single road existed, and this meant the New Zealanders couldn't move their tanks forward. And it seemed the Allies failed to learn the lesson of the first bombing, that all they were doing was creating a more effective killing zone for the defenders. So close combat becomes the rule of the day, and the Fallschirmjager were more than effectively trained and ready for such fighting. These guys were great at close combat. So March 12th of 44, about 30 hours in, some small progress is made at Castle Hill as it's taken by D Company of the 25th Battalion. And additionally, 16 platoon managed to climb a near vertical cliff face to reach the ruins of the castle from which another assault on the Abbey can be launched. But before that can happen, the 1st and 4th Essex regiments must move into position. Now for 4 hours, the Essex platoon climbs through the dark until they reach their positions. Meanwhile, a battalion of 200 men from the 1st Paratroop Regiment heads toward Castle Hill. Soon intense fighting erupted, and one German soldier states that it was a crime for the Allied generals to send their soldiers up the hill. And he says, quote, "We could have stoned them to death. They bled to death. We could hear them crying. It was terrible. To shoot at them was hard, but it was either them or us." End of the quote. The 1st and 4th Essex barely held against the German assault on Castle Hill, and a truce was called, in fact, so that the wounded from both sides could be collected. And the Allies, in fact, withdrew from Hangman's Ridge. And so the Allies' third attempt to take Cassino also ends in failure. And in 2 weeks of fighting, roughly 5,000 soldiers now lay dead, as German paratroopers from the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Regiments still hold the Abbey. Soon the U.S. 5th and British 8th Armies ready themselves for yet another go. The plan for the 4th Allied assault will include all 28 Allied divisions, and they'll engage in a three-pronged attack with 8th Army on the right and Clark's 5th on the left, with the Polish Corps, the 3rd Carpathian, and the 5th Krysowa infantry divisions comprising the vanguard of the 8th Army. Now, it's extremely important to the Poles to prove to the world they could fight. Now, these are the same guys that just got basically steamrolled by the Germans 39, and they have a lot to prove to themselves and to the world. So on May 11th of 44, 1,600 guns pound every known defensive position for 40 minutes. 2 Polish divisions start the assault on the Abbey. One Polish soldier stated that he could see a German machine gunner laughing at him, and my presumption is that the Germans are just so struck silly by what they perceived as a weird combination of the Allies' belligerence and persistence to take this place. For nearly 30 hours, fighting continues as the Poles become pinned on cavalry mount, but the Germans, regardless of how well they can fight, can't hold on forever, and eventually Kesselring's 71st Division begins to pack it in. And this is after 5 months of probing, and finally a break in the Gustav Line forms, and the Allies basically just flood it. But the monastery itself remains a German stronghold. So May 17th of 44, the Poles are hell-bent on reaching the monastery, and it's no longer even necessary to do it. But just 200 men from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th German paratroop regiments hold out on cavalry mount. One German soldier stated, "You were shattered, but you always had plenty of wine, plenty of whiskey, schnapps, and rum, which kept your spirits up." And the old saying, "Take a shot of courage." Well, I think what we had going on here was slightly drunk paratroopers who were pretty much numb to everything around them, and As the fighting goes on, the Poles throw in the last of their reserves, which consists of drivers, clerks, and the like. So finally, on May 18th of 44, the Poles enter the perimeter of the Abbey walls and expect bitter fighting, but instead they're met with silence as the paratroopers had withdrawn the night before. And but to this day, it's stated that the Fallschirmjager were not defeated here, as technically they withdrew the night before. So finally, the Poles enter the monastery itself, but 2,000 of them would never see it as they lay strewn along the path to the abbey. So hell of a fight. And as far as anything in Italy goes, definitely my favorite by way of battle. So regarding Monte Cassino and the Abbey, a few games you can look at. You've got, if you're into miniatures, Flames of War deals with Casino, and they have a specific book out for it. I haven't played it. Seems like it'd be cool to play though. But Thunder Casino is what you want. Regarding this game, it's an area movement game, and much like Storm over Arnhem, Turning Point Stalingrad, Breakout Normandy, came out in '87, and Avalon Hill game designed by Courtney Allen. Now this guy, if he doesn't ring a bell, well, I'll refresh your memory. He's the one that did Storm over Arnhem and Up Front as well, which are two Hall of Fame games in my opinion. It depicts the third battle, which is, as the designer states, the most balanced of the four. The components are as such. You've got counters, which are significantly, there's more of them than in Storm over Arnhem. And additionally, they're smaller for some reason. You've got half-inch compared to the 5/8 inch counters of the other games in the series. And in the 9-turn game, the Allied player has 124 unit counters and another 60 when playing the campaign game. And the Germans have 145 counters and another 11 in the campaign game. Now, when you open the map board up, it is mounted, and there's mixed opinion regarding this map board. Some people think it is atrocious, an ugly duckling, a failure. I think it's pretty decent. I like it. I'm not really sure how much different they could have done this. It depicts the terrain quite effectively and functionally, as well as looks wise. It's just it works all the way around. But as I said, a lot of people would disagree with that. So, and as far as battle landmarks, it depicts Hangman's Hill, the Abbey, and Castle Hill. So, among other things, it's divided into 68 areas, and it's a decent size. The scale, unlike Storm over Arnhem with its implementation of squads, this game deals with platoons. So your scenarios, you have counterattack at the Roundhouse, which is a 2-turn scenario. Simulates a German counterattack on the town from the west. Assault on Castle Hill, which depicts a German attack on the town from the north. Then the Final Days scenario, which covers turns 10 through 15. And then there's a 9-turn scenario, or you can extend it to 15 turns if you want. The rules are about 10 pages, with a full page and a half of designer notes, which, of course, I just think that's fantastic. And regarding the scenarios and order of battle charts that help facilitate setup, they look remarkably like the squad leader scenario cards. It's kind of cool, actually, if you get a chance to look at those. I'm sure there's a picture if you go to Board Game Geek. And the mechanic of the game is similar to the rest of them in the series. Units begin the game uncommitted, but as they either attack or move, become committed. So you have a tactical advantage chit, and this can be used by a player to re-roll a combat resolution or declare night conditions for the rest of the turn. So there are night turns. He may also force a continuation of a turn, and will additionally go first during a given turn, and finally chooses the order in which multiple areas of close combat are resolved, and this can mean a great deal. Combat plays out like this. Fire attacks are resolved by determining the attack value of the firing unit and comparing it with the defense value of the defending unit. So the attack value is equal to the attack factor of any one firing unit in the attacker's choice plus your die roll, +1 for each additional firing unit beyond the first, +1 if 3 of the firing infantry units have the same organization. The defense value is equal to the lowest vulnerable face-up defense factor of the group being fired on, plus a die roll, +1 if the firing unit is in an adjacent area. Then you add in your terrain effects modifiers of the defender's area, +1 if the defending unit occupies an area at a higher elevation level than the firing unit. Also +1 if the attacker is firing into or from an area containing smoke or during night. So you resolve it as such. If the attack value is less than or equal to the defense value, there's no effect. If the attack value is greater than the defense value, the difference between the attacking value and defending value is the minimum number of casualty points that must be removed from that area by the defending player. So nothing too complicated there, and again, that should be somewhat familiar to those of you who have played games in this series before. Casualty points are absorbed through either elimination or retreat, and the attack factor of a unit was designed, the designer states, based on number and type of weapons, while the defense factor was based on morale, training, and experience for infantry, and armor thickness for tanks. The machine guns are basically your knockout pieces, but tactically speaking, close combat gets the final say, and these machine guns don't do you much good in close combat. Artillery is represented by observers and barrage counters, and interestingly, observers on Monte Cassino may call in fire anywhere on the map, which again resorts back to that theme of the all-seeing eye. At game start, dice are rolled for each area in the town of Cassino to see how much rubble is created to reflect the bombing. I think that's pretty cool. Additionally, after the Germans have set up in the town, you're going to roll to see the extent of these casualties. And there are night turns, as I said, as well as exclusive smoke rules, and you may even run into an occasional tank-on-tank battle. To win, the Allies need 16 victory points, and the town consists of 11 of them. The area north of the town comprises about 6, and the abbey itself is worth 6, with an additional 2-point areas scattered around nearby. And there are bonuses for capturing areas in the town before turn 4, so it encourages some quick movement. Some minor misgivings. If you compare it to the historical information that's available, well, we're not dealing with any minefields, no fortifications. And the Rapido River makes more of a cameo than a supportive role. And there's a few other things that get left out, and it's mainly due to scale. And you can only put so much game on the map and in the box, right? So I think he did a good job. And again, you can't recreate and represent every single thing. It's just not possible. So you have to learn what to edit out, and I think he's done that quite effectively. Designer notes, highlights. Many gamers have this thing about hexes, and that's how one of his paragraphs starts in the designer notes, and I'll read the paragraph. Many gamers have this thing about hexes. They tend to look down their noses at area movement games. If it hasn't got hexes, it can't possibly be realistic. Balderdash, he says. A hex grid is nothing more than a common measure of area or range. If superimposed over a map without consideration for the consequences of the terrain it dissects, a case can easily be made that it is a less realistic format for the display of a battlefield than a carefully constructed area movement map. In my game, the areas are not haphazardly determined by a common grid. The terrain has been carefully studied to determine probable fields of fire and areas of exposure for the existing weaponry under the prevailing conditions. And the town insert map, the, quote, areas of exposure, tend to correspond with the actual block outlines. If one were to move from Area 7 to Area 10, for example, you would have to cross a large street. To do so with any degree of assurance of actually getting to the other side would require time and finesse. This translates into movement factor in game terms. The presence of enemy units or machine guns complicates the matter further, requiring more time. Read movement factors to get across the street safely. So it's kind of interesting. And actually, everything he states within the designer notes is equally interesting. So thank you for that Courtney. Overall, I'd say this game is definitely more involved and more complex than Storm over Arnhem. Then again, so are the other two, so I don't know if that really means anything. So if you haven't played any of these games, start with the Storm over Arnhem and then maybe move to this if you're already familiar with it. Give this a shot. But you'll need to have a particular interest in the battle being depicted. As though on the surface it may appear fast-paced, it is in reality a grinding crawl of a conflict. But also, I think, an exciting and intense one at that. And the battle itself, as I've stated, is just interests me to no end. And as far as Italy goes in general, I think this interests me the most of all the battles. So there you go. Dealt with Monte Cassino, Fallschirmjager, and a game specifics, Thunder at Casino. I will leave it at that. And as far as what's on tap, I do have some specific areas I'd like to cover, at least by way of overview. I'd like to do a ASL overview and something that would be beneficial to the beginner, an overview of World War One, Civil War, Napoleonic era, Africa, and World War II, as well as the Pacific Theater in Vietnam. So those are just a few things I'll be touching on in the near future. But also, I'm leaning towards possibly taking a break from these shows for a bit, maybe a couple weeks or so, because what is happening is I'm spending more time, and not that I don't enjoy doing it, but I am spending a little more time on preparation and research and recording and editing and posting than gaming, and gaming's where it's at. So I think I'm going to focus on that for the next couple of weeks, and when I get to the next show, I get to it, but I won't be in any hurry. And also, April is right around the corner, and well, April's a big time for me because that means playoff hockey, and also Game of Thrones, and this would be the, I believe, third season. I've watched all of the first two seasons. I'm not the biggest, I don't know if you would call it technically, well, I guess it is fantasy stuff. I'm not the biggest fantasy guy, but this show is truly the greatest show on earth. You can't do any better. If you haven't watched it, if you have heard about it, thought about it, haven't done it, well, do it. Watch it. Start with the first episode, work your way through both seasons, and then you'll be ready for the third. It is a great series, and the writer, who my brother is familiar with, a word of warning, don't get too attached to a character because he's not afraid to kill that character off. That's all I'll say. I don't think that's too big of a spoiler, so don't think I ruined anything there. But yeah, just don't get too attached to anybody because everybody's fair game. And it's not your typical Battlefield stuff. It's more of the intrigue and behind the scenes goings ons of running kingdoms and dealing with everything that entails. And it's fascinating. And there's multiple storylines, so you get bored with one story, there's 3 or 4 or 5 other storylines that you'll follow along through the show. So give it a shot. I think it's fantastic, obviously. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening, and keep gaming.